Good evening, YouTube. So I thought I'd make a quick video since I had some time. Family's not around, so I got a little bit of time, even though it's interrupting my reading, but I'll go ahead and make this video. Yesterday, or day before yesterday, I finished Enemy of God by Bernard Cornwell, and I just want to, I'm going to talk about it a little bit. This is it right here. I mentioned in my previous video, I'd actually read this series once before, about 10 years ago. Somebody at the library had suggested it to me. And I really loved it then, and I really love it now. So it's been pretty great. I've already started Excalibur. I'll probably be done with it by tomorrow. Maybe not done until Sunday, it depends. I also read, I just finished today, The Abbot's Tale by Con Ingleton. I didn't really love that. I thought like the first 150 pages were pretty good. Con Ingleton, a trope of his are these coming of age stories, and I thought that part was interesting. And then once that was done with, I kind of lost interest in the book. I had to really make myself finish it. It wasn't terrible, but I'd say like a 6.5 out of 10, maybe a little lower than that. And that's the thing with Con Ingleton. He's when he's on, he's on. And when he's off, he's not so great. So the last time I was reading his Greek series, it's about the Peloponnesian War, and I kind of felt the same way. Like it started okay, and then it just didn't really do it for me. I'll still try his Nero trilogy sometime. I like Con Ingleton. I really liked Falcon of Sparta, and I read that a couple months ago, and I really enjoyed that. I've liked a lot of his stuff, actually. His Genghis Khan series is really excellent. If you like historical fiction at all, I'd really suggest that series. I liked his War of the Roses series too. But this Enemy of God, I'm going to make a whole video about Bernard Cornwell soon. This is my favorite author, and it's not even a debate. I might wait till the new Sharp book comes out and read that, and then make the video, or maybe I'll just read another Sharp. There might be, I think there's one or two others I haven't read, so maybe I'll just check on that. I'll read those, and I won't wait for his new one to come out next month. But I'm going to do a whole video about Bernard Cornwell. But yeah, this Enemy of God, definitely check this out. It's an Arthurian story, and the idea, the premise is that if it's like a what if Arthur was real. It seems, at least in historical records, that there was at some time somebody named Arthur who fought for the it might sound confusing, the British, and I mean the native British, right? Not the Anglo-Saxons. So this is like the Celtic peoples that live there. So modern day Wales and even really Scotland and Ireland and Cornwall, which is not a country, but has a lot of, Brythonic heritage. And there's haplogroups and stuff there if you're into any of that. But anyway, it's just, this is a really fantastic read. I mean, it's not perfect, right? There's some flaws with it, but I love it. I think it's great. And it's medieval and dark. And I think if you read this series, Bernard Cornwell's he's a pretty well-known author, and I think you'll see how influential he's been on people. Because this was written, I think the first one came out in '95, and he released them all right back to back. So I think how much he's influenced people would be pretty obvious. And now obviously he had his own influence as well, but this is definitely not your Disney version of King Arthur. I mean, in Enemy of God, there's a scene. So Arthur has two bastard kids, right? They're twins, and they've been with his enemies basically the whole time. At the end of the book, he cuts the hand off of one of his sons. He said, you raise your hand to your father, so now I'm going to take it. And of course, Durfel, the point of view character, helps him do it. And so we'll probably see that pay off a little bit in Excalibur. Maybe, I'm not going to give it away, but Excalibur, it's a good book too. The thing about this book is it's not the point of view of Arthur either, right? And so there's a lot and I think this is something Bernard Cornwell does just a great job of. He does really well. I mean, he nails it. So anytime, there's just always like, in this world, and you can call this world building if you want, I guess, but there's always things going on elsewhere, right? That is, since we're at the point of view of Durfel, he's our point of view character, there are things going on with other characters and other places that we don't see, right? But we hear rumors about it, we hear whispers about it, right? Your spies talk about it, whatever's going on elsewhere, right? And that stuff often pays off, right? And the rumors are sometimes true and sometimes they aren't, right? And I think it's a really interesting element. He does a really good job of that. You're hearing about these fights that are happening elsewhere and these relationships that are happening elsewhere, and people are falling out elsewhere. And then you see these things come together, these plot threads come together, and he's really good about that, right? And a lot of times the rumors are kind of true or not true at all, and he's just he really nails that. Like and he does it in his other books as well, right? That goes on all the time in the Last Kingdom trilogy, series. Sorry, I almost said trilogy, but it's a series. There's like 13 books in it. It's definitely not a trilogy. But they're great, but he does that a lot. You'll obviously, and then what goes on in the Arthur trilogy, there's a lot of similarities. Obviously, there's ideas he took from this and put in the Last Kingdom, and that's fine. A lot of authors do that. It's not. I wouldn't say it's definitely not bad, because it's not. There's just stuff that's similar, right? Like Derfel he's actually a Saxon, or really an Angle raised by Brythonic people, which the Welsh Celtic people, that people group or ethnic group. And he's raised by them. That's but he speaks the Angle and Saxon language, but he also speaks the Brythonic language. So Derfel's an interesting character. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in this Enemy God. There's the Tristan Isolde story that is pretty good, and it's actually really good. And that's you see some of the flaws of Arthur, right? Because he's honorable to a fault, right? He really believes in oaths, and he will do things detrimental to his own friends because of it. And so Arthur's a flawed character, but he's a good person. And that was the other thing I was going to say. Arthur's not the main character, so you'll sometimes go 100 pages, 150 pages without Arthur being there. But you always hear about what he's doing usually. And he's the gravity it goes around Arthur, because it's always like, what's he doing? There's a point where Derfel and Arthur fall out for a little bit. And it's always like what, people are asking him about him. So there's always hints and whispers of Arthur. And I think it works really well, because anytime Arthur is on the page, and this might sound a little cliche, but the pages turn themselves, because he's such a fascinating character, because he isn't perfect, because he is flawed, right? Guinevere obviously has committed adultery and has cheated on him, but it's, what's going to end up happening at the end. He doesn't kill her. It's within his right to do so at this time, because this is a really medieval world, just like Arthur taking his son's hand. That was considered, part of their culture at the time. They did stuff like this. And I think, some people might read this stuff and think like, oh man, this is, really gory and violent. But, this was a different time. Back then, it was harder to enforce laws, and it was even harder to prove somebody broke the law. Not that, it didn't, if the right person said you did it, it didn't matter anyway, right? If a lord or a priest or anybody who's considered of a higher rank says you did something, there wasn't much you could do about it, right? But the point is, these punishments would be incredibly severe to prevent people from doing these crimes, and that was just one of the only ways they could do it. So and it makes sense for the time, right? You don't got forensic evidence, you don't got they don't know about fingerprints or any of that yet, right? So anyway, eyewitnesses are pretty ideal, but again, even with eyewitnesses, one of these higher level people, speaks against you, you're in bad shape. So anyway, it's a really interesting and it's a really interesting element of the book, and I think Bernard Cornwell does a really great job kind of demonstrating that. He doesn't make this some perfect world. These people have lice, they stink, right? He talks about that stuff. They haven't bathed, they have greasy hair. So when someone's clean, it's actually, it's noticeable, right? And I think he does a really good job of capturing that. Like people, like everyday people in these books, and this happens in the Last Kingdom too, in the Last Kingdom series too. They will know if somebody is noble or of like a higher station just by their cleanliness, right? It'll be obvious to them if their hair smells good. They know this person is of royalty or whatever, right? Like if so they're gonna know if there's a noble person in a group, like if they, invade a group of people and get to the camp, the war camp, or they're civilians, they're going to know which people are, nobility and which ones aren't, just by little stuff like that. something else that's interesting about Arthur in this. Arthur's kind of, especially in the first book, and which is I so far I think the Winter King's my favorite of the three so far, but I like all of them a lot. But in the Winter King, you know, Arthur's a horse lord, right, and not quite like Genghis Khan, but he has heavy, you know, he's using heavy war horses, right, which is something that the Saxons are not used to. They haven't really seen it before. And it may seem unusual to a modern reader, right? Like, what? They're just horses, like, whatever. Like, they all have horses. But, you know, to them, these differences in horses would be like us seeing the difference in a make and model of a car, right? Maybe not quite like a truck and in a sedan, but definitely the difference we can see between two sedans, you know, and they can see those and spot those differences. And when these horses are really big and carrying armored men, you know, who are carrying spears and sword, multiple weapons, you know, it's, you know, he does a really good job of capturing that stuff, and he even talks about, you know, the Saxons using using axes, and the difference between an axe and a sword, and the advantages and disadvantages of either. Where, you know, an axe plays to a person's raw strength, right? You don't need the practice and the training that you need with a sword to be effective with it. Granted, that's not to say there isn't any skill with an axe, but if you're just a strong human, you're going to have an advantage with an axe, right? Because because of the center of gravity. Right, the physics just work a little bit better if you're just a brutally strong person with, you know, good leverages. So, not that stuff doesn't work for a sword either, but a sword has a different center of gravity, right? Now, swords have lots of advantages. You can use them defensively. You can jab with them, but an axe has an advantage at a shield wall because you can hook on a shield and pull a shield down, right? And an axe will hurt somebody, even if it's dull as a rock. You know, it can still deal fatal blows. So anyway, the point is, I'm not saying an axe is better, but my point is that it's, you know, he talks about this stuff in the book in a natural way. You're right, that makes sense. You know, so it's not like exposition heavy and you're bored because they're just talking about all this little stuff. So I think he just does an excellent job of capturing all these things. And this ended up being a Bernard Cornwell video, so he's my favorite author for a reason. And I want to talk about some Sharp novels on here. At one time, that was the novels he was known best for, even though I think The Last Kingdom has overtaken that, and I think that's what he'll end up being remembered quite a bit for that Last Kingdom series. One, it's really good, but two, the TV show is really good, right, and really well known. You know, even my wife likes it, and she doesn't even like history stuff. So it's maybe I could even talk about the Last Kingdom series on here a little bit. It's because it's a good TV show. In my opinion, I would say I'd say it's roughly equal to the books. The books are just more fleshed out, and I think that the books have a little bit of an advantage in that. But you know, it's not a movie, right? They don't have the budget a movie does, even though they spent a lot of money on that show. They had good actors in it, so. But yeah, expect us to talk. You probably hear me talk about Bernard Cornwell a lot. I want to talk about Wilbur Smith too. So I finished The Abbot's Tale by Con Engleton, but I went ahead and started today the John C. Hocking new Conan book by Titan Press. It's been out for like a month, or maybe it might be 3 or 4 months. It hasn't been out that long though. It's relatively new. They released it as a double feature with the Conan the Emerald Lotus, which he wrote back in like '93 or something like that. John C. Hocking did. The new one. The double feature together is called The City of the Dead, but the second book has a different title, and it escapes me at the moment, so I apologize for that. But you could look up Conan City of the Dead, and it'll come up if you want to see it on Amazon. I started reading that. I'm a couple chapters in on that. I always kind of go back and forth between two books. And I like it so far. Of course, it's the Emerald Lotus. I've read the Emerald Lotus, but it was like 15 years. I read that when I was a kid, so I don't remember it at all, right? I know I read it, though, because I remember seeing it on the bookshelf at my grandma's house. Old mass market paperback. I think it might have had a Frank Frazetta cover. I could be wrong about that, though. I could maybe try to. I'm not going to do a bunch of editing on the video tonight, so I'm not going to put any covers and books in here, but anyway, but I remember reading that years ago. So, I like it so far. You know, it feels very Conan-y. A lot of people say that Emerald Lotus is the best, you know, Conan pastiche novel. I really like the Robert Jordan stuff though. So I plan on reading those again sometime. I never read all of them. I know I read like the first 2 or 3. I'm gonna read that sometime, but I'm gonna read these other they kind of Titan put some effort into this, man. Titan Press, Titan Books, whatever it is. I've seen both. I've seen it called both. They got kind of a murderer's row of authors on these books. It was I'm going to say the names. One of them's Tim Wagner, and the other one is the one author I didn't know really great. The other one I did though. Well, S.M. Sterling did. I know exactly who S.M. Sterling. S.M. Sterling wrote Dies the Fire. But one of the other two authors, S.M. Sterling did a Conan book too, for Titan Press. So of the other two authors, one of them's Tim Wagner, and I can't recall who the other one is, so I apologize for that. It's like Levin or something. Sorry. And there's even, actually, I think there's even a third author now that I think about it. So 3 more additional authors on top of John C. Hocking and S.M. Sterling. But they kind of, all of them are pretty well, decently well-known authors. They've done a lot of licensed properties. One of them's the writer of The Silence, which most people would probably know from the movie on Netflix, which is like the bat-like creatures. It's like a post-apocalyptic story, and they have these bat-like creatures that are released from a cave. So one of them's the writer of The Silence and wrote some. I'm sorry, I should have looked it up before I got on the video. I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about that or not. But they got a slew of good writers on these books that have got years and a huge catalogs of stuff they've written. So anyway, so I'm going to check them out. I'm going to read them all. I think the guy who wrote the Solomon Kane novel's name is Sean Hamill, and he's got a back catalog of stuff too. I didn't know all the authors, but they all, when I looked at their catalogs of stuff, like a couple of them have written Alien books, like the Alien franchise. One of them did a bunch of Firefly books. Firefly's old TV show by Joss Whedon. Anyway, so I'm going to check those out. But I'll definitely be talking about this Emerald Lotus and City of the Dead sometime on the channel. And I enjoy it so far, so I think it's pretty good. So I think that's all tonight. Sorry, it's not being a little longer than I thought. So, good day, good evening, wherever you're at.